Hey guys, welcome to my album review for Mastodon's new album Hushed and Grim. I do apologise that I did not review this album on the exact date of its release because, number one, I was live streaming at the day it came out and I was doing a band rehearsal, and on Saturday I was totally not free at all because I was busy with my band to do a gig. Sunday, which was yesterday, I was totally lacking of energy and didn't want to make a video, but since that I am now here to finally review the new Mastodon album, here it is, and I hope you enjoy the album review. Peace and love, and check it out. What's up guys, the Strong Boys 19 here. This is going to be another new album review for another 2021 release. And I'm going to be talking about the brand new latest studio album from the band Mastodon, entitled Hushed and Grim. Now this is the band's latest album to be released in their entire discography, and this is the follow-up to their 2017 album of Emperor of Sand. This was released through Reprise Records, and David Bottrill has done the production for this record, and also this is the band's longest album to date at 86 minutes with the track listing of 15 tracks. Now, as much as I have been really anticipated a lot, along with Torn Arteries, this album was actually my most anticipated album of 21, with many new albums that had been released. I was one of these people that was just so pumped with what Mastodon can really achieve with this new album. And by the way guys, I know I have not been reviewing the earlier Mastodon albums yet. I will go to Blood Mountain, but since this album was dropped, I really wanted to do my full album review of this record, and I will promise you all that I will be back at one stage to return back to the Mastodon discography. Now, I'll have to say that with my experience with this record, this is maybe and arguably the band's most experimental record, and there's a lot of the personal aspects that Mastodon had done before. Ever since their 2009 album Crack the Sky, a lot of the lyrical contents from this album and onwards, the band were going through so much more in the versatility of musical influences, and with later albums they were at some points going through the music arrangements involving some hard rock, some alternative metal to a bit of a heavy metal kind of aspect. And with these types of lyrics on this album here, this is more or less onto the dedication to the band's former manager, Nick John, who had passed from cancer a couple of years back. And a lot of the lyricism of this record alone deals about the whole words onto the death, the grief, the guilt, amongst these types of things that was all so consistent with this album. And there's so much to really dive into when you would really absorb a lot of the majority with this record. The first track on the album, Pain with an Anchor, a quick fade in with Brand's drumming, and does present a brilliant vibe right at the start with the guitar arrangements, and Brandailer's vocals are dramatic on the verse sections with the harmonies that were matching along with the music, and it does begin to build some more intensity. And some of the riffs were arranged in a bit of like a Crack the Sky / Blood Mountain kind of touch. And I think that Troy Sanders' vocals were making the chorus a bit darker on the descending mood of its aggression. And I find that some more of these rhythmic build-ups builds so much fruition, involving the colourful wah-wah drenched guitar solo. And I find that Pain with an Anchor does explore the beginning points of the atmosphere, involving the layers on the various riffs, and quite a destructive ending. So I think that this was a brilliant starting point to begin the album with the noticeable change of difference. The crux is more or less on a focused and balanced type of intro with rhythmic sections of drums and guitars that do match to follow the vocals, loud screams in the background from the chorus while Troy sings, and I find that it does deliver on some more of the very slick and precise way on their skills. It has a bit of a groove to it at the same time with its melody as well. Onto the brutality, some of these riffs were really sludgy, and just as an aesthetic approach, some of the guitar soloings on this track does make me think on a bit of like a David Gilmour, Pink Floyd kind of sound, with the cleaner tones that was really placed so comfortably. And I think that there's a bit more of the versatility in the sludgy goodness on this track's stellar work. Sickle and Peace. This is a song that does provide a lot of the melody and the mood, and I find that these types of vocals were pretty breathy, but it works so much alongside with the technicality on the drums and these painted guitar lines that this track does provide some shimmering and drifting type of vibe. Instrumentation that at some points, especially on this chorus, that it does get grunty and such a broody part. The chorus on this track made me think on some of the darker parts, like on the Remission record. Though I will say, besides the really liking interaction of vocal harmonies and separate volume changes, I think that this is a pretty interesting number with so much of its own introspective and diverse sections. More Than I Could Chew is one of the other songs where Mastodon takes things down into more of the gloomier side, which does involve some keyboards, ominous feeling, and then the destructive, awesome riffs do begin with a bang. The vocals do bring a unique flavour from Bron, and also, once again, Troy's vocals were excellent because it brings some more punishing roots. The drums do syncopate as brilliantly. There were some points on this track that it was a little bit repetitive as it was going along here, but with the majority, especially with the bridge section to make a separate appearance to continue the delivery of the track, it's something that I do like. But as a track, this is personally one of my least favourite numbers of the album. The Beast. Clean beginning on some beautiful guitars, and at first the 3/4 time signature comes to play with Brent's vocals that were this time taking in on the lead vocal department. And there were some of these whammy bar styles of guitar playing that was like pretty bluesy to my ears at least. But I think that this presentation of a track does make me wonder on a bit of like a Once More Round the Sun kind of vein. And speaking of that album, I think that Once More Round the Sun is maybe the band's most underrated album, as I think that this track alone does have a bit of the progressive rock settings with the way it was written. Wonderful lead guitar work involving Marcus King's guitar lines of his solos that were adventurous, that tremendously stands out. Then we go into the track of another one of the tracks that I really dig a lot, which is Skeleton of Splendor. This was absolutely hook driven. It's kind of like similar on What Cracked the Sky was, onto the setting at first of the acoustic guitars and the reverb drenched vocals that sounded absolutely fantastic. The tremolo effect of the guitar's tone was just exquisite, with the majority of the song that was all matching so much glorifying beauty. I really like the quieter vocals and the experiments that they do incorporate some matching synthesizers that was masking its own mix. And I think that this was really a brilliant follow-up to The Beast as a whole. Then we go into one of the singles prior to the release of the album of Tear Drinker. I can see why that some people would say it's a bit safe and a bit pedestrian, but I will have to say that the more I thought about the track and listened to it more and more, it's a bit of a grower with me, and I really like that it does have that eerie but sweetly melodic type of arrangement, especially on the vocals. I will have to say that it's something like on a Blood Mountain type of composition. It was really well paced, and it was just as a directly melodic direction onto, I think, one of my favorite parts about this track being the vocals, as I think that Brian Dailer's vocals on this track and a lot of this album were just so prominent and really consistent, and I think that this is maybe the most consistent Mastodon album where you would hear Brian Dailer's vocals so many times here. But this track, Tear Drinker, does have a terrific hook and a wonderful craft. So I think that Tear Drinker does take a bit of the patience to really dig, but I think that this was a grower quite a lot. And especially onto the first music video and single of the album, Pushing the Tides. And I know that I've done my listening and reaction to this track alone, but this beginning does have a manic, chaotic type of sludgy beginning, like on a Remission type of vibe. Troy's vocals were absolutely strong on this track alone here, and I think the chorus was just awesome with the blaring chords and the interactions with the drums and the booming bass all at once here. So I find that it does take some dedication and more listens to absorb Pushing the Tides, but I think that this track does have some frenetic and really tearing things apart, punchy type of aesthetics the more I think about the track. Peace and Tranquility, which is the last track on the first disc on this album. I'll have to say, from the beginning on the legato-packed intro on the guitars and mad but controlled drumming, the beginning of this track started things completely amazing, and I love how this track started. But then the track really just transcends into a softer, consistent, gloomy type of identity on a simple approach of songwriting. But I will say that Peace and Tranquility is sometimes a little bit difficult to digest, as I find that this one was one of the other unmemorable parts of the album with its multiple sections that for me just don't quite fit in and match with me like on the other ones that I've talked about so far. Then we go into the beginning of the second half of the album on disc 2, the track of Dagger. This is beginning onto a weary yet a cinematic approach type of direction, background sounding drums and a vocal effect, but it does paint some different imagery that I was really surprised to absorb so much. It's really repetitive as the percussive nature fills things all the way through onto this track's entirety. It's mostly the percussive number on the record, but it does involve some congas, some synths and keyboards, and this is a track that would maybe be the one song that many Mastodon fans would either accept or not, but I really like this track. It's like on a tribal type of vein, if you ask me. So I really think that this is one of the other unique ideas of writing in Mastodon's music. It's kind of like with the beginning of Capitolian Crest from Blood Mountain in a way, but this is even more percussion driven. Had It All, this is what I would say is like the only ballad-ish type of musicality. This is all on the acoustic guitar settings and hearing some more various vocals, but Troy's vocals on this track were calmer and quite touching in this type of sound. The electric guitars and the chorus do drone, while the slow pacings do remain all consistently here. But I think that Kim's solo on this album's track was really good and trippy. Kim, the lead guitar player from Soundgarden here, makes such a brilliant addition to make this track what it is. And it's quite a rare type of composition where I would hear a piece of material like this, but it has its own language and presence. The track of Savage Lands is just as amazing as with most of the first half. It's one of my favourite highlights of this album. It's such an energetic number, faster tempo, switching back to the aggressive touch, tons of hooks, and phenomenal attacking grooves, and also some of their most vicious riffings that I've heard that was just at a crushing mark of adrenaline. And I really think that it does make me reflect on possibly something like on a Leviathan-ish type of edge. And of course, on to the next track on the album, of Gobblers of Dregs, which is the longest number on this album. It's 8.5 minutes, but it is their most progressive one at this point. The keyboard ambient introduction, and the band decides to slow things down once again on a doomy style, but I really do love this track. It was just magically growing by itself from the start to the finish, with some more atmosphere and a dread, desperate type of feeling, especially on these brooding riffs. And of course, onto the switching parts onto the middle section, involving a lot of dexterity, techniques, and some wonderful, accomplished layers of melodious and attachable skills, with such a great presentation. And I find that this is another one of the highlights of the album. The second to last track of the record is, to me, another big, amazing track of Eyes of Serpents. This is a song that has some kind of like a dreamy type of fruition to it, all at once at first. Again, onto the tremolo effect with the guitar chords. Troy's performances involving his melody works as efficiently, with some stunning emotions onto this track. It's dynamic, and it's another one where it does have some surreal and rich interplay involving some more twin guitar goodness. And I absolutely do love this one to be personally one of my new favourite Mastodon songs, as well as the other ones that I really like so far of the record. The last song of the album, Gigantium, starts things on at first of like a doomy type on guitar riff that, you know, don't take this too seriously, but at first the riff kind of reminds me on a bit of like a Black Sabbath song, slow direction, but the vocals on this track really shines on the registers, and this does mark something on a comforting and optimism type of aspect without making anything too cacophony driven or complex. And I think that while this is not like a strong closer like with the track of The Last Baron from Crack the Sky as an example, but I think that this closing track finalizes the album in a really bittersweet but in a good way type of note, and also with the additions of the strings to the violins and cellos, they add such a beautiful point to make this composition well balanced. And I think that Gigantium is a very, very nicely put together composition to conclude the album. The overall production on the album is personally maybe the weakest part about the album, besides the other weaker songs that I've addressed. I think that the drums of this album are mixed a bit high, and that the vocals were kind of backed off once again, besides that the aggressive nature on the guitars were blaring so amazingly with a brilliant guitar tone at that. But this type of mixing is kind of a bit off balance. It's kind of like the same issue that I had with the new Gojira album. So I was a little bit put off by the way this production had sounded, but I still find when it comes to most of Mastodon's albums, they were phenomenally big. It's as bold and such a unique way of hearing Mastodon, with a wonderful and glorious make of production. And in terms of production albums, it's obviously going to have to, for me, go with Blood Mountain as my personal favourite produced Mastodon album, besides Crack the Sky and also Leviathan. But I find with this style of production, it's kind of like not taking it into like a defining fulfillment from the way the album did sound. But with the majority of this album, I really appreciate and respect what Mastodon can really achieve and wants to make on this album. This is a record that for some fans of Mastodon, that they would really dive into this in an open way or would be a bit indifferent upon this one because of the way it was written. It was just so much versatility going on here, because with some of the instrumentation passages, there were moments that I find some bit of psychedelia vein in a way, with a bit of an alternative kind of approach as well, besides some of the reminiscences of earlier albums I've said earlier of most of the tracks here. But I really think that Hushed and Grim is the most unique and direction-driven Mastodon record yet. Do I prefer this album over the earlier albums? I will have to say probably not. Does it really fulfill me enough to maybe put this in as one of my favourite Mastodon albums? I will have to say it's an acceptable pick. What you would like to experience with what you would describe and say your own personal views about this album. But overall, I think Hushed and Grim by Mastodon is a very, very strong record, besides a few weaknesses. But since that these guys are one of my favourite bands of all time, I just had to really give this album a lot of the attention in an optimistic kind of feeling, and much respect to the band for making a record like this, especially when it comes to some more on the difficulty that they've went through prior to this album, and with the other struggles of words in the personal aspects that they've done previously. But I think that this was something as adventurous and something to behold for Mastodon as a whole. So that's all I would like to say about this new Mastodon album of Hushed and Grim. Let me know what you think of this album in the comments down below. This is absolutely going to be one of my 10 favourite albums of the year. Now, I would say that it could maybe not be selected as one of my top 3 albums of 2021, but with me being a massive fan of Mastodon, this really does come pretty high with where I would be ranking this album in the list. I'm going to give Hushed and Grim by Mastodon a 9 out of 10. Do you think it's one of the best Mastodon albums, or do you think this album is indifferent to you? Because I am very, very interested to know what you guys personally think of the record. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll keep you guys posted for more videos in the near future.